And I'd like to introduce our speakers here today, or rather I'll let them introduce themselves. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Addie. I am the COO of Mach 37 Cyber Accelerator, and I also serve as its Chief Wellness Officer. I'm also COO and CWO of our parent company, VentureScope.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jason Chen. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Mach 37 Cyber Accelerator, and I'm the founder and CEO of VentureScope. So first off, we just wanted to say thank you all for joining us this morning to help kick off the week at RSA. We have a lot to tell you about today. We're going to try and rip through some slides pretty quickly. But I just wanted to start off by letting you know that Jen and I have done a lot of these, and we can rock the PowerPoint as best as anyone. But we really like to have a back and forth dialogue. So we're looking forward to your conversations and questions and discussion points at the end of our presentation. First off, a little bit of background information on us. We mentioned Mach 37 Cyber Accelerator. Are most of you or anyone in the audience familiar with startup accelerators by way of hands? Okay, so great. That's actually, that's pretty good. Okay, so Mach 37 was...
For those of you who aren't familiar, an accelerator is a program that takes an early stage startup and helps teach it and accelerate it into the market. Uses a network to connect it with funds, with education, with the right channel partners and customers, and allows them to basically gain traction and potentially launch the way they'd like to.
So Mach 37, thank you, Jen. So Mach 37 was founded by the Commonwealth of Virginia in 2013. It's known as being the first startup accelerator focused on early stage cybersecurity startups. They brought us in 2017 to operate the program, and in 2018, our parent company acquired majority ownership, and in 2020, full ownership of it. Since its inception, Mach 37 has supported over 85 cybersecurity startups. Over 85% of them are still in business, and over 64% of them have raised follow-on capital. That's just trying to be a polite way of saying that Mach 37 and our team have been around for a while. We've been operating in the early stage emerging tech cybersecurity landscape for a good amount of time, and we've seen a lot. There's a lot of stuff that's kind of steadfast, but there's also been a lot of changes, particularly over the last few years. So our goal today is to maybe go over some of those dynamics in the industry and in the business climate, and let you know some of the things that early stage cybersecurity startups are facing and how accelerators, not just Mach 37, but various accelerators can help support them.
When Mach was first established in 2013, it was more of a regional economic development play by the state of Virginia because Washington, D.C. was one of the few ecosystems very focused on cybersecurity at the time. Things have changed massively. And so one of the things we're looking at now is how have customers changed in terms of their view of cybersecurity, and how are they willing to work with startups? Sometimes it can be very intimidating to work with a company who's brand new. You don't know if their tech is vetted. You don't know if their team is strong enough to bring it to market. You don't know if they're going to be around in 2 years to keep working with them. And that's a big issue with a lot of big players, whether it's Fortune 500s or government. When they're looking to work with startups, they can be a little hesitant. And so as we look at the way the market changes, we're also looking at how people are viewing startups and willing to work with them. Because at the end of the day, the reason we do this and the reason we put a lot of time and energy into startups is they end up paving the way for the future of some really amazing solutions. Those startups are identifying problems some of us haven't really come to recognize exist yet. They're coming up with solutions none of us have thought of, and they're willing to take a lot of personal risk to bring them forward. And so we believe in a lot of the folks who are willing to do that, and the accelerator serves as a way to support them.
All right, so emerging tech. We all know this. There is a ton going on these days, right? AI this, quantum computing that, cybersecurity what, how, when, what's going on. So needless to say, right, cybersecurity has been fundamental in emerging tech for a long time. You all know this already. But with the rapid changes and advancements in various types of technologies, Needless to say, cybersecurity is going to play a critical role and continuing to grow a critical role throughout various technology industries.
And when you look at technology, I'm sure you're all familiar with the idea that the technology adoption curve is now nearly vertical. It took years back in the day for a new technology to be accepted and tested and adopted widely, scaled across an ecosystem or across the world. And now you have apps that land and have over 1 billion users in a day. And so when you look at the rate of which technology is being adopted, the democratization of technology, the ability for more people across the world to create new technologies, and then the ability to set up a company very quickly, all of those have converged to put a plethora of new, exciting companies and technologies out there. The question then is, how do you manage security when you have that many new technologies, that many new companies coming online at any one given time? And that's something everyone's struggling with, even when you're a cybersecurity expert. Those who aren't as fond of cybersecurity, who see it as a have to rather than a want to, are often lagging behind in a lot of their cybersecurity needs, and they aren't looking to push the future in order to sort of get ahead of the adversaries as much.
Okay, so what do most early stage cybersecurity companies need, startups need? What do most startups need in general, right? Investment. So, next slide. So you would think, today might be a great time to be doing a startup in general, or a cybersecurity startup, but unfortunately, winter is here. The VC landscape, the investment landscape in all startups, but including cyber and cybersecurity startups, has significantly shifted over the last couple of years. Next slide.
And when you look at the way that new technologies such as Gen AI and high-powered computing are impacting the landscape, the word we hear from a lot of partners and a lot of customers is fear. We're afraid. And so they are a little hesitant to know what to adopt when, what solutions will be safe, and when the market is contracting, they don't know where exactly they should invest.
So thanks to PitchBook, we have this neat little graph. If you take a look at it, you'll see in 2023 how the bottom fell out, right? You can see how investment in general has dropped to the lowest point since roughly 2016. And if you look at early stage cybersecurity, which are the blue, look how small it is compared to the other years. I mean, it's just completely shrunk. And so we had this major shift in the investment landscape, particularly hitting early stage cybersecurity ventures. Next slide.
Now there's some other things that also impact the cyber investment area. One is a lot of the solutions are now advanced enough that it's more difficult for customers to understand what they are and what the value is. And that goes for investors too. Sometimes it will be an amazing solution that hasn't been translated to that real impact and value in the way that people understand it well enough to invest properly. And so the translation of talking tech to a lot of folks who might not be familiar with cyber, as well as moving customers into the space where they're having more active demand signal, they're asking for more products, they're willing to pilot more products, that's still shifting, and it's not quite there yet.
And so we have this investment climate that's not the greatest, but then there's also the geopolitical climate, right? Which I probably don't need to go into a whole lot of detail. We know what's going on there, right? East versus West, a lot of competition regarding proprietary intellectual property on various technologies, all of which cybersecurity is involved in and can help protect.
And a lot of startups are in a tough position. They have limited budget to run their companies. They're in a situation where they're not getting a lot of interest from domestic VCs, and they will basically look to anyone who's willing to give them money to prolong the life of their company and potentially get their technology to market. And sometimes there are adversarial investors present who are willing to make a small investment or even a large investment in order to get a hold of the IP, to dominate an industry, other things like that. So we are seeing trends like that, and we've seen a number of cyber startups fall into that trap where they wouldn't have taken the investment dollars had they realized who they were going to be doing business with and how the company would end up being taken over.
So if you do a quick Google search, right, you can see how cybersecurity and cyber attacks are making frontline headlines every day almost, right? And it's not just in the US, it's globally. So in spite of the investment climate, with everything that's going on geopolitically, you basically have what's going on, essentially, is a shadow war, right? That is where you have basically nation states or rogue organizations and actors. And cybersecurity isn't just part of this growing battlefront, it's arguably the front line of it. And if we can tell you a quick story, we have a Ukrainian cybersecurity company that we know well. And for security purposes, we're not going to mention the name of it. But long story short, several years ago, it was trying to enter the US market. It did pretty well. It raised capital. Obviously, the investment climate was different back then. It developed a production line. It came to agreement with several channel partners. It even was able to get its product up on Amazon and other e-commerce sites. So needless to say, things were humming along pretty well for this company until February 24, 2022. We all know what happened. And so it shifted its attention from trying to enter the US market to actually trying to protect its country. Right? This is what I mean by the front line. So Jen and I had an opportunity to chat with them about 3 or 4 months into the war. We were very worried about them. We were relieved to find out that they were doing okay. They were all alive, and they were actually doing well. Not just they individually, but also their company. The founders had stayed in Ukraine. Some of their staff had relocated to other parts of the world and were essentially able to continue to operate their business. And over the course of those 4 months, they had actually reached out to both the Ukrainian civil and DoD defense agencies and to offer their services. And in a matter of months, they got picked up and were helping to harden the networks of these agencies. And so Jen and I were chatting with them and getting all this really interesting information. And at the end of it, we said, how can we help you? We're very concerned about you guys. We're sorry about what's going on.
And at the time, we were still concerned about cyber war. Everyone expected Russia to be much more aggressive. We wondered if they had started out slow and might escalate, and we anticipated that might be coming.
So we said, what can we do? Tell us. What do you need help with? What do you think their response was? We expected them to say something about help us get more funding, introduce us to people who can help defend our country, blah, blah, blah. Nope. They said, yeah, this is pretty terrible what's going on. All these cyber attacks coming from Russia, they're kind of annoying, but they're not that bad. We're managing those pretty okay, actually. What you really need to be worried about is China.
And so here we are, 4 months into the war, and our jaws are on the floor, that they're in the middle of the Ukrainian theater saying, don't worry about us, worry about it.
They're getting missiles, bombs lobbed right at them every day, and they sat there and told us that we needed to worry about China. So needless to say, that was just an extremely eye-opening experience for us, but it just demonstrates how cyber and cybersecurity are really at the forefront of a lot of stuff that's going on in the world. And it's, like I said a minute ago, right? It's essentially the front line. We don't even hear about some of the stuff that's going on and the role that some of these early stage cybersecurity startups are actually playing in a lot of stuff that's making headlines these days.
And in the corporate world, we often measure success in terms of thwarting attacks or recovering from attacks from a dollar standpoint. But there's also that military and defense standpoint of making sure our infrastructure is safe and everything from the bridges and power grids to the future of space. And so when you look at where cyber is going, that's where we see a lot of traction and a lot of investment coming, is looking at those future scenarios and the future needs to secure networks in much farther reach places, whether it's during a geopolitical conflict, whether it's in space, on the moon, or if it's simply a situation where it's a non-state actor, but they're sort of the Al-Qaeda of cyber in the future.
All right. So what does this all mean? It means that the demand is still there, right? There's tons of problems, tons of challenges that are facing various people and organizations around the world where they're looking for and need cybersecurity solutions, unique ones, emerging ones. However, despite that demand, it's gotten a lot harder, right? The problems themselves, the challenges themselves are tougher, right? The investment climate is not supportive. And so ultimately, trying to do a cybersecurity startup, despite some fantastic demand signal, is tough, and it's getting harder.
So given that there's less investment out there available in the early stage, a lot of the startups are looking to figure out how they can survive and how they can get to that next level where they can get customer traction, they can work with channel partners, they can work with governments and other large organizations in order to get the solutions in the marketplace that need to be there. And they have to get really creative to do it. Startups have always been savvy, they've always been really good at coming up with ways to prolong their life cycles, but it's more critical than ever right now. And so one of the ways that we're looking at supporting them is through accelerators. And we're going to be moving into that topic in a minute. And that's why we do what we do. Well, one of the things that they are looking to understand is, what do you want? What do you want from wherever you sit, whatever your organization is? What do you need from the emerging tech market? What do you need from a startup in terms of how they should work with you? What are you willing to do in terms of piloting a new technology or introducing them to someone who may really need that tech? Right now, one of the best ways to overcome the funding shortage while still meeting the demand that we all need globally is to work as a network.
So, as I said, it just got harder, right? If any of you are familiar with the startup curve, this is typically the life cycle that a startup goes through. And if they're lucky, they make it to the far right, right?
How many of you have lived this cycle yourselves, whether you have been in a startup or not?
Okay.
Right? Anyone who's sort of done product development, probably.
Yeah, it's like this, you start off and it's yippee, have this awesome idea and super excited, quitting your day job and gonna go change the world, right? And very, 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 very quickly, reality sets in, and it's hard. Doing a startup, any startup, is arguably the hardest thing that anyone can do in business, right? And it's this trial of sorrow that we like to reference a lot, where a lot of startups get stuck. And so what we're looking at right now in the cybersecurity landscape is, despite this demand signal, despite this need, there's still an ever-increasing risk that more and more cybersecurity startups are going to get stuck there. And so one of the questions that we need to figure out are how can we help them?
Yeah, and so a lot of partners with startups are investors, accelerators, everyone else. Our goal is to de-risk the investment, to de-risk their projects and what they're doing, so that it's easier for them to succeed, and we have mitigated the larger concerns that may bring them down.
And because this startup curve just got more difficult, things are more risky for the founders. And let me just foot stomp this because I think Jen already mentioned it, right? You have increasing demand, you have increasing needs, you have lots of very sharp cybersecurity founders with great ideas. And they're trying to get out there and they're trying to help others, but they're running into these challenges. And so what does that mean? It means that their desperation that a lot of founders typically feel, everyone does, just to be clear, as a founder, right, is increased. And that opens them up to a lot more risk, right, which we're going to get into.
They also have a lot more competitors now. Now that there are more people beginning startups, there are a lot more people flooding the market in the same areas. And so the question on everyone's mind is, well, who's the best option then? And how do you tell if the tech is real or if one feature set is better than another? And so when you look at competitors, a lot of times the startups don't even know who else is in stealth mode developing their own company doing something similar. They will sometimes hear that large organizations are, right? You have, a big Fortune 100 sort of in the same space, but they're looking to get there first. And so speed is of the essence. And so if they don't have the resources to move quickly, the startup loses the only advantage they actually have.
And so, despite all this, there are some really good opportunities for cybersecurity founders. And there are some folks who can help them, like accelerators.
And so that's what we're focused on, is finding the right opportunities for good teams and good tech so that they can move through the window.
We have a friend at Virginia Innovative Partnership Corporation, which actually is having, I think, a social during the week, which I highly recommend you all go to. They were the organization that actually set up Mach 37 back in 2013. So we have a friend there. He's an investment director named Marco Rubin, and he has a great quote. He says, "It's not about momentum markets. The best athletes are made during market downturns." And that's spot on. So we have all this stuff going on. We're in a market downturn. We have great opportunity. This is an opportunity where founders can seize some amazing opportunities to bring some great solutions to life, but they need help.
And the reason an investor would say something like this is that it's not just about how good the technology is. In fact, there are amazing ideas everywhere. There's great tech being developed everywhere. With a startup, the differentiator is the team. And so anytime you work with a startup, particularly with an accelerator, it's a pressure test. We're seeing, can the team do what they say they think they can? Can they deliver the results that we've been expecting? And this market downturn essentially turns up the heat on the pressure cooker a little bit to see, if those teams can really come together and succeed, or if that pressure forces them, to fall apart.
So enter accelerators. Jen already gave a quick overview of them. Some of you are familiar with them. What are they? Essentially, they're centers of gravity, right? They bring various resources and various networks to bear on an early stage startup to help it solve some of its key problems, refine their business model, refine their operating model, improve their product dev, and get it to market. And they do that via, and we have this Venn diagram here, via these various stakeholders and partners in the different ecosystems that they operate in.
And accelerators have different ways of going about this. So in the past, sometimes you'll have seen accelerators throw just a lot of money at early stage startups. They're like, oh, you've got a Stanford degree? Great, here's your money, right? One of the things that we're seeing now is that a lot of those investments weren't what they wanted them to be, even from the acceleration standpoint. And so the accelerators themselves are shifting as well. They're looking at what made the startup successful in the last few years and what is going to make them successful in this climate, and what are the tools and things that we need to give them in order to actually make it through. And that doesn't just include, a curriculum and all those things which we're going to get into, but it's very much connected to networks. Who are the experts and subject matter experts who are in the ecosystem, and how can they work together to move things forward?
So how do they do all this? First thing first, Jen just mentioned curriculum. Most accelerators have some sort of pathway that they have their cohorts go through, which usually has some sort of thematic week-to-week aspect of their business or product that they want them to work on. And during that week, they'll bring the companies in, they'll run workshops with their operations team serving as subject matter experts, or sometimes, actually a lot of times, bringing outside experts on various topics that are critical for that theme. And the goal is to essentially help the startups polish where they're already strong, right? But then fill in the gaps and develop strengths in areas where they have challenges or weaknesses. And so by the end of this program, which are typically 3 months long, you have a company that has been accelerated in comparison to their peer competitors and de-risked, as Jen said earlier in this presentation.
And what we see, particularly within cyber, is we have a lot of startup founders who are technologists. they might actually not have a business degree or a lot of experience running or starting a business. And so particularly in cybersecurity, we see a lot of them coming for curriculum in the fundamentals in business and legal and all those types of compliance and things like that, that they were building their baby, they have this beautiful product, but then they're now coming out sort of into the cold world and saying, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this than just a good product. If you build it, they will come, doesn't work. And so they've built it, now they need a little bit more business acumen and networking in order to help bring it forward. The other thing is a lot of times the founders have not really built a team yet. They might have a couple people, but they realize we have gaps in expertise. And so the curriculum helps them realize, okay, the first hire we need to make is probably in this area for this reason. But if you're a novice founder, you don't necessarily know that. And so the curriculum allows them to sort of see all the different topic areas that you need to address as a business owner and prioritize your time and energy and resources to make the right moves first. One of the things Mach 37 has done is look at accelerators and realize that our Cybersecurity Accelerator, which is a 90-day program for early stage startups, that fit the bill for a lot of people, but there were some that needed curriculum way ahead of that. They weren't even ready to come into the accelerator. We formed a pre-accelerator to help them get up to speed to get to the point where they could even function in the accelerator. And then we had alumni come back after doing Mach and saying, hey, I know you taught us on this stuff and it really didn't register at the time, or it wasn't the right time for us to apply it. Now we need help again, but in this next later phase. And so we created a growth stage accelerator. So when you look at acceleration, it is sort of this nurturing, but in different phases and different ways along the path.
Which this slide points to, right? An accelerator isn't there just for that 3-month period, as Jen was just saying, right? Its goal is to support the founders even after they graduate through all of their stages of growth and all their various stages of revenue as well.
And one of the hardest things for startups is sometimes success, right? It's easy when you have the product and you have your small team, and then all of a sudden, if the dog catches the car, what do? Right? Now you have a bunch of customers and you have to hire a bunch more employees and you've got to scale the company very quickly. And you want to succeed. You don't want to let any customer down or any channel partner down at all. And so how do you do that? It's an exciting time when companies hit that point, but that's when you sort of need folks coming together as well.
And then as Jen was saying a minute ago, throughout this growth cycle, this life cycle, they're going to need different support, different resources, different expertise. Particularly in cybersecurity, as Jen said, lots of technical founders who come in and realize they're missing some of those business skills that Jen was just talking about. And so the other thing an accelerator will do is essentially help introduce them to co-founders or first employees to help fill those skill gaps.
One of the things that a lot of people don't think about when they're creating a company is that you actually have to build your own culture. And if you don't deliberately think about it, you often just let your habits form your daily rhythm. But we've seen a lot of startups stumble when they do that. We have a lot of folks who are super committed that are working their tails off, and they begin to struggle, whether with their well-being or with the dynamics with the team. And so working with the startups to help deliberately build their culture, decide how they want to work together, how they set expectations, how they make decisions, how they're going to choose who their investment partners might be or their channel partners might be. Because those are long-standing marriages when you make those business agreements. And so when you work with a startup that has come through an accelerator, they have been exposed to a lot of that thinking, and they are often much more deliberate in how they go about doing business with you.
I was going to say, and just building on what we're telling you, another quick story. We supported an accelerator back in 2014, 2015 that was operating in the West Bank. All right, so hear me out for a minute, right? It was basically pitched to the US government and the Israeli government to operate an accelerator in the West Bank that supported startups that were co-founded by someone from each side of the green line. And I'm going to actually go into a little bit of detail here because obviously everything that's going on geopolitically is important. So this is another example. So when it was launched, everyone thought it was an amazing idea, but it wouldn't actually do anything. And the goal of the accelerator was, yes, to support startups and entrepreneurship, but it was actually meant to show conflict mitigation by demonstrating how creating economic incentives and ties between two different groups of folks can actually help solve some of the political and military conflicts that they might have. So everyone loved the concept theoretically, didn't think it was going to be successful, but it got funding. We ended up getting over 30 applications to the program, and 11 companies graduated. And each one had either a founder from Israel or the West Bank coming in saying, I have this idea, I'm building this technology, I'm willing to partner with someone on the other side of the green line to help me do this. And if you ask yourself, well, that's cool from what you're saying from the accelerator standpoint, why you wanted to do it and how you were able to pitch the governments to help support and fund it. Why did the founders want to do that? Because we didn't go out there saying, conflict mitigation, right? We went out there in a traditional sense of an accelerator saying, we want to help you grow your venture. Well, think about it. This is exactly what we're talking about. Various resources, various skills gaps. And so what did you have on the Israeli side? A great tech corridor, amazing cyber talent, right? In the West Bank, on the Palestinian side, you had some very smart business acumen individuals who had access to the Middle East funding. And so both sides actually saw that if they could work together, they could benefit from each other's strengths. The Israelis can bring the tech dev, the Palestinian founders could help introduce those teams and their company and represent them to large amounts of potential venture capital in the Middle East. So that's just an example.
And those of us setting it up believed in the idea, and those who were applying did too. It wasn't the safest thing. They had to meet underground. It was still had to be managed very carefully. It wasn't easily executed. But several of those companies stayed in business for a long time. I don't know their status right now. But it was seen as an experiment that they didn't expect to succeed, that went far above and beyond anyone's expectations. And one of the things that people took away from it is that looking for those common business outcomes is really sort of where a lot of good partnerships form. And that's where we see that partnerships with a lot of startups work well. The other thing that we see in startups is we mentioned well-being. And so when you think about well-being, sometimes it feels like a very nice sort of extra soft skill thing as a side program. But if you look at the hard numbers, any investor, any accelerator, we look at why are startups failing? What makes them fail? And KPMG, several other Harvard Business, several other organizations have done studies, and they have seen that actually a lot of the behaviors that caused the startups to fail actually came out of a lack of well-being by the founders. So the stress and the impact of actually going through the process of taking on all this risk and doing all this work and stretching your resources, putting mortgaging your house, really taking massive personal risks, sometimes hurt the founders to the point where it was hurting the company. And so as an investor, that's not a great investment. And to be clear, the investor climate was fostering that. The investors, we were all happy to be like, work harder, run faster, go, go, go. That means you're a good founder. But then when you see them crash and burn, and the whole thing goes, not only are they not okay and their business is not okay, but the investments aren't either, it doesn't help society at all. And we see this in every organization across the world. This is not new to startups, but it's magnified for founders. And so what we started looking at Mark 37 is what are the different areas of well-being and how can we make the founders aware to detect when things might start going wrong and then provide a support network and resources to help them. The low estimate is about 22% of startups fail because of a lack of well-being. That's a huge, huge number. We had a company we worked with who, very amazing founder, subject matter expert, ranked top 10 in his field for years, and had a phenomenal technology and a great business going. And his employees loved how hard he worked, and his investors loved how hard he worked, and his family did not. And his wife left, took the kids, and he spent the next 5 years battling to try and get time with them. It took so much of his time and resources that he couldn't really focus on the business the way he needed to. And employees started leaving, and he ended up going back to being a solo founder for a while. It took him over 5 years to get back to the point where he could hire employees again. The tech was still great and viable, he just couldn't make it happen. And so looking back, his big realization was, if I had managed that better. And so we all live that. You don't have to be a startup founder to experience that. But the point is, sometimes you're so focused in the trenches that it can really feel all-consuming to the point that it takes out other things. And so one of our goals is to work with venture capitalists and other investors and the larger tech community to promote well-being as we are pushing hard and running fast to get this stuff, meeting those cyber threats that are coming every second, right? Don't give us time for rest, to still manage that.
And so when you mix all this together, right, the curriculum, the access to various unique networks, the well-being support, the goal of an accelerator and one of its fundamental roles in the ecosystem is to essentially help the best tech with one of the strongest teams win.
Yeah, a lot of times they think it's the teams, but it's a lot of the tech. So how can we can make sure the winners and the things that we really need in the world actually get there?
So with all that, right, essentially an accelerator, like in its name, Accelerate, helps give the startups a unique competitive advantage, right? It gives them fuel to move faster than their competitors, and in some cases gain some of those first mover advantages that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do.
And a lot of that comes through our networks. The people who are investing have changed their investment theses. They're changing what they put money towards, and we need to understand why and where they're going. The threats are changing. The technology is available to changing. A lot of our current cohort has a lot of Gen AI, imagine, technologies. We've been doing artificial intelligence for a decade, but now there's this shift on how it's going to be applied and how the market is getting flooded and utilized. And so we are there not just to vet the technology and the teams, but to connect people and ensure that people are really addressing the problems that are hurting us the most as a society.
So I like this cartoon, right? You're fine, but the teddy bear can't come in until he's properly vetted, right? So in Accelerator, we've talked a lot about how it helps the founders, but it actually supports and provides value to the entire ecosystem, right? It helps the founders get these resources, it helps vet investors and channel partners and customers and help introduce them, right? It helps support their well-being, but similarly, it actually provides a value to the ecosystem, right? Which essentially helps to validate the startups that are coming out of the accelerator, right? We're saying we've seen a lot of interesting technologies. We had a bunch of companies apply to a program. These are the best of the best, and not only did they make that cut, we then put them through this process that has improved the various elements of their business, right? So essentially, accelerators have a multi-sided market. It's known for supporting the founders, and that's expected, but it provides significant value to the rest of the ecosystem as well.
And so when we hold our events, when the accelerators bring people together, it's everyone, right? Folks will come up and say, I'm just a technologist, I love this stuff, I just want to be near it, it's inspirational. Other folks will say, I want to be an advisor. Someone helped me when I was early on in my career, and it changed the trajectory of my life, and I want to give back. And a lot of folks in the startup community are very much doing that. Right now, particularly when there are different opinions on the focus of technology and where things are going to head, those dialogues at a lot of these events, like events like this, can really change the way that technology ends up evolving over time. And in the cyber community, a lot of times, we're security conscious. We're not sharing a lot of information. We're not talking as much as maybe other communities of startups. And sometimes that actually hurts us as a cyber community. So finding ways to connect without feeling like super vulnerable could really help all of us.
And so when all this works well together, essentially what is an accelerator able to do for founders and ecosystems in today's climate, right? It de-risks those ventures like we've explained. It helps maintain the open markets, and it helps protect ecosystems, customers, investors, and founders from nefarious actors.
Our tech scouting teams look very closely at how a lot of the trends are going. Where are the skills coming out of in terms of all the universities worldwide? Where are the majority of the startups forming in quantum or semiconductors or other areas of space? And where are we putting our resources to make sure we maintain the capabilities within our own communities?
So quick story, just to kind of foot stomp this point, because I think a lot of folks hear about, bad actors, bad investors. I'm sure some of you may have heard, this in the news. It's very real. In fact, there was a company not far from here that a few years ago ran into a big problem. Again, we're not going to name the actual company. Long story short, its founder had developed a very unique solution to help identify issues in chips while they're being manufactured. And it was such a unique solution that it was essentially being sold into the top chip makers around the world. He hired his first few employees, 3 of which were Chinese, and they worked there for about 3-4 years. And after a few years, one of them said, "Hey, I'd like to make an investment into the company as well." Again, we've explained the need for investment for that runway. They took it, and as part of that process, the investor, the Chinese investor, had access to what is referred to as a data room, which anyone know what a data room is? Okay, data room, I'm seeing some heads nod. For those of you who don't, data room is essentially where, when you're a startup and you're seeking around, you store a lot of proprietary information about your company, your financials, contracts, information about your secret sauce, so that essentially investors can do due diligence on you and get a look under the hood to make their decision. And so he did this and raised capital from that investor as well as others. Well, fast forward a year and a half, 2 years later, what happened? That investor moved to China, took a couple of the employees with them, and set up what is essentially a competitor for that startup. And not only did they take a lot of that proprietary information, they even took some of the hard drives. So this stuff does happen, right? This is obviously a pretty extreme and bad example, but it's out there. And the company is still in business, but to this day is trying to figure out how can they enforce their IP rights, and it limited effect. At best, they're going to be able to help isolate that competitor to China, but the reality is that it's out there. Their technology's out there, and they're going to lose a lot of the advantages and proprietary information that they had.
So accelerators come in all shapes and colors. You'll see there are tons of names out there, and a lot of times they do different things for different ecosystems. Mach is one of the few dedicated strictly to cyber, but we work with a lot of other accelerators and partner on events and other things like that as well.
Yeah. If you are a founder and you're thinking about an accelerator, or someone is, right, there's different types of accelerators, right? There's those that are run by essentially venture capital firms, or were accelerators that turned into venture capital firms, right? There are accelerators that are run with corporates, where essentially it's hyper-focused on an industry or a sector within that industry, right? Ford has actually done some auto-focused accelerators, partnered with them. Land O'Lakes has actually done some with some food, right? So those are some examples of corporates. You have obviously the government. You have industry-focused accelerators like ours, Mach 37 focused on cybersecurity. You have tech-specific accelerators, and then you even have a lot of accelerators that are starting to be run out of universities because they have great engineers, great R&D departments, and are trying to learn how to commercialize a lot of the IP that's coming out of them.
And this is not exhaustive, just some
Yeah.
examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of folks will say, well, why go to an accelerator at all? A lot of the startups can just go straight to the VCs, can't they? And why not do that, right? And there are benefits and drawbacks to both.
Yeah. So what's one of the main benefits of going to a VC, right? Well, they can infuse your startup with a ton of cash. And what does that do? That allows you to grow and scale your business with speed. Like accelerators, they also provide some amazing guidance and advice, right? Most of the folks inside a VC firm are pretty savvy business folks, and they also have access to mentors and other individuals with specific expertise that could potentially help a startup.
But there are also some drawbacks. As we've mentioned, a lot of times they're not ready to necessarily meet with an investor. They haven't necessarily gotten their business acumen together. And sometimes the startup doesn't realize that when they take investment, their business model is no longer, their whole business becomes the investor's business model. And that can really change the trajectory of what they thought they were doing. And sometimes startups will lose steam. So being able to work with an accelerator often allows them to de-risk their expectations a little bit and prepare for the relationships that they're going to build and execute.
We actually have a VC that comes in and runs 1 or 2 workshops for our cohorts, and it's very interesting. He's a VC, right? So he's all about his business and the line of work that he's in. But one of the key messages he says to our cohorts is, I am the last person you want to get money from. Consider my capital radioactive. Okay. So the point being is that there is a time and place, to be fair, when it does make sense to go raise capital from a VC. Just to be very clear, we do this as well, so we are totally pro venture capital. Just know that there's a time and place, and we run into a lot of startup founders, especially first time, who think that going to raise capital and pitching VCs is what makes them a real entrepreneur, and that's simply not the case. That's simply not the case. The other thing I'll mention real quick about the venture capital route is that it takes time. And a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of founders severely mistake how much time it's going to take them. It usually takes them 2 or 3 times as long to raise the capital and close a round than they expect. And that also doesn't guarantee that they're going to close that round or be successful. In fact, most folks aren't successful in raising capital. And so it's essentially a full-time job. It's at least 1 FTE or more to go raise capital. And what does that mean? You're a cash-strapped, resource-strapped small startup. You're taking away time from running, growing the business, building out the technology, doing your customer discovery and development to go pursue this capital. And so again, right, for certain companies it makes sense. For others, there's another path, and that path is what accelerators are there to help.
And so the message we'd like to leave with you is that accelerators are there to sort of enhance that inspirational part of the emergent technology. Finding the tech that really is strong, finding the teams that can do it, providing them the resources. And we invite you to become part of an accelerator community somewhere. It could be Mach, it could be somewhere else. But whatever your role is within this industry, you have something to give. You have something you can contribute. And so if you're interested in talking to the startups and potentially bringing them in as a partner, if you're interested in mentoring, if you're just interested in learning about the technology to further the discussion out in the industry, that's all very helpful. And so, we welcome you, we invite you, and we thank you for everything that you're doing in the industry.
Yeah. So I think that's it. Thank you all very much for joining us today. I know we have like 2 minutes left. I was hoping to have us wrap this up like 3 minutes ago, but we're happy to answer any quick questions, or if you all want to come up to us afterwards, we're happy to chat. And just to kind of foot stomp what Jen just said, right? If you're interested in applying to an accelerator or working with an accelerator, feel free to reach out to us, not just for Mach 37. We're happy to point you in the right direction to the best of our ability.
And there is an innovation sandbox, I think, happening next. And so we wanted to highlight that to you.